Hey, welcome back to the Dirt Road. I'm here with Mr. Rick.
That's Mike over there. What's happening, pal? It's been a little while.
It has been. It's been a few days. We had a lot of work, so unfortunately, outside of this, so it's been a little bit, a few days, but a lot's been going on, so we got a lot to talk about.
Just in case you don't know, we don't make shit off of this. We don't even know how to make shit off of this, so we actually have to work.
Yeah. You think about it. We're actually not getting paid to do this. We're doing this to abuse you all. Okay?
You know, some commenter actually, I just remembered this now. Some commenter said something like, "We're doing this for the money and blah blah blah." Where's this money coming from?
Yes, I don't know where that money's coming from, but
dude, I don't even know. I know that there's a thing called monetizing it, but I wouldn't even know how to do that.
You'd have to do like I forget how it goes, but there you could monetize it, but. Listen, we're not monetized. We're not making crap off of this. If anything, actually, we're losing money because we're spending money on it. So, but we're doing it because we're actually passionate about bringing people back together again and having a normal, everyday conversation again about this stuff without all the.
Well, I do it
vitriol.
Mainly because you're one of the few people in this world I could actually have an honest conversation with and not yell at me and call me a liberal if I dare to say that Donald Trump fucked something up, you know.
Oh, that shit's crazy, right? It's the fanboy politics is awful, but yeah, that's what needs to happen again. Listen, I'm all for Trump. I'm all for Trump's policies. I think the guy's phenomenal. He's hysterical. That doesn't mean I agree with everything he does. I don't agree with everything he does.
Listen, I said it before. The only person I've ever agreed with 100% of the time is me.
Exactly.
That's it.
And even then, I'm like, probably didn't agree about most of it.
I always agree with me. Even when I change my mind, I tend to agree.
I tend to agree about changing my mind.
Yeah. But you just can't have. But we've beat that dead horse a million times. You know, you just can't have normal conversations anymore. You know. I voted for Trump twice. I'm going to vote for him a third time. You know how many people will call me a liberal because I say, I don't know what I don't even know what the hell I am. Like, how do you know what makes you a conservative or this and that? The only way I've ever described myself is maybe I'm a Reagan Democrat because I do, the old Democratic Party type ideals. A lot of them I'm fine with. I mean, I'm pro-labor. There were things that I agreed with them on, but I was a Reagan guy. That's when I really started getting into politics and everything. And I tend to vote mostly Republican. And there are some local races I vote Democrat only because some of, we've reached out different times to our local politicians for help, and they've provided it. And why in the fuck would I not vote for them after that, Yeah. During Hurricane Sandy, a couple of times there was one thing that happened with Janice one time where one of our local politicians helped with school, which is going to be the topic of our conversation today, schools.
Yeah.
But, so of course I'm going to vote for them. I don't care if they're a Democrat or Republican, but for the most part I vote Republican, but it's just amazing how people will call you whatever they want to call you.
They'll call you a rhino, they'll call you a liberal, they'll call you anything other than, because you're not doing what they want you to do. So I told you, during the campaign, that's all it was. It was a lot of people who wanted to hear their words coming out of your mouth.
Absolutely.
And
that's what people search for online, right? I mean, they just search for people.
They want the echo chamber.
They want to hear them. They want thumbs up, when they post a comment, and they feel good about themselves. Whatever. I mean, it's each his own.
The virtue signal. Yeah.
Not my thing, but whatever.
Let's just have some real conversations, not call each other names, and get back to a place where we can all actually be Americans again and start actually doing the things we should be doing to make the world better for ourselves, our families, and for those people we all care about elsewhere. We
do have a very thoughtful. I don't know if this person's a he or a she. We've shouted this person out once or twice before. DCL 14-1 R2D2's cousin, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, whoever it is very thoughtful comments, respectful, nice. Yeah. Tends to agree with you more than me when we do disagree, which is rare, but we have. Anyway, so I promised this subscriber that we would not only just talk about this, but do a whole video on the topic. He or she commented after we were talking about the Department of Education one time, and I had told you that there's 4,000 employees. It's like, what the hell's going to be the difference if you cut that?
Dropping the bucket, yeah.
So the person said, on another note, the Federal Board of Education has to go, although I didn't realize the staff is as small as Rick stated. The budget is $68 billion and nothing good comes from the Federal Board of Education. It has to go, my opinion. Now, I disagree with a couple of things. One, $68 billion sounds like a lot of money, but the fucking mayor of Munchkinland there from Ukraine came here and left with $68 billion the last time he came, and the time before that, and the time before that. So, it's a lot of money, and I know that,
in the big scheme of things, it is a lot of money, but in the scheme of the government spending,
in the big scheme of things, it's not. Yeah. No, it's really not. And I know that it's not a pie that gets cut up, like just because we're sending money to Ukraine, we can't spend it on something else. It doesn't work that way. I know that. I know how supplemental funding works and everything. Am I boring you?
Nope. Sorry, guys.
But it still bothers me that people are just so in favor of handing him 68 billion, 80 billion, 90 billion, this and that, but then they want to cut the Department of Education because they spend 68 billion on education programs.
I'd rather see the 68 billion go to the kids than go to Zelensky and the rest of the psychopathic warmongers. It's me. But yeah, I mean, we talked about that, right? But I mean, we talked mostly, I think the whole idea of that conversation should have, or what it was intended was about how to reform that system, how to bring that system back to a place where it actually functions and actually functions properly, and then we can actually get our children to a place where they're actually being educated, like realistically, really honestly educated. And I think we agreed at the end that whole thing has to do with taking the handcuffs off the teachers. Let teachers teach.
It does.
Get rid of the bureaucrats in there, get rid of the top-heavy administration side of it, maybe. But let teachers teach, and that's what's really going to make the difference.
And the general thing is, look, Republicans have been talking about, how they hate the Federal Department of Education since it was cut from, I think it was Health Education and Welfare Department. That was
79.
cut into,
yeah, 79 it was. Yeah.
So it was cut into the Department of Education and Health and Human Services.
Yep.
And listen, conservatives have always hated that. I don't, for many reasons. I mean, anything it had to do with Carter, so of course, you're not going to like that.
Well, it was a Carter initiative done in 79. Reagan actually was one of Reagan's campaign things was to end that, and he never did.
No, he didn't, and nobody is. A lot of that's just phony and farcical. I don't know if you remember Rick Perry. I don't remember if it was 2012 primaries or 2000. I guess it was 12. He didn't run in 2016. The governor of Texas, and they asked him what departments would you want to cut, and he listed 2, and then he couldn't think of the third one, and he says, what does it matter? We're going to cut 3. It was just like, all right, we want to just cut agencies, and I get it. It's a bloated bureaucracy, and the problem, and I don't want to rehash this, but just the one point that I did make to you about funding for private schools is where the government puts their money, they make their rules.
And that's the problem we have with the Board of Ed right now?
Right, and that's one of the things that bothers people about the Federal Department of Education, too.
That might be, that's probably the answer, is that not so much the extreme of cutting it away.
Sure.
But maybe just stop tying the money to whatever political narrative is time is popular.
Right, and that political narrative is almost always leftist.
Yeah.
So, look, I just wrote down a few things, just some numbers to put out there, and for you and for our viewers. So I can only talk to here. We can't go through every state, obviously, but New York State spends about $37 billion a year on education. $35 billion of it comes from the city and the state. $2 billion comes from the feds. It rose to $4 billion with the COVID stimulus, and then it went back. Yeah. And it was also, it rose when Obama did his stimulus, but those are usually 1 or 2 year things. So it sounds like a lot of money, but it's a very, very small percentage. And where these things go are mainly, and I'm not talking about school lunches or anything, because I believe that comes from the Department of Agriculture. I don't think that comes from the Department of Education. So we'll leave that money out of it. But the federal funds, almost all of them, go to what's called Title I, which is for 2 things. It's for kids with disabilities.
Right.
Because there are a lot of people don't realize this, and thank God you don't, because if you don't realize it, you don't have a kid like this. But there are 12-year-olds that can't wipe their own ass.
Yeah.
And you have to pay what the rest of the world calls a teacher assistant. In New York City, we call them a paraprofessional. We literally have a job called a toilet para.
Yeah.
And their job is to take this kid to the bathroom and make sure that they go and they clean. We're not talking about a 4-year-old in pre-K. This money has to come from somewhere. Kids with severe learning disabilities, physical disabilities, they have to get educated. They're part of our society too, and that money has to come from somewhere. And most local municipalities can't afford that.
Sure.
So that money comes from the feds.
They're not raising the money on that level.
No. And that money comes from the feds. So that's the Title I stuff. And then there are other things like supplemental stuff like Head Start, and that's always been something that people do. There's also a lot of impact. Say again?
Head Start's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. But again, with that money comes the rules, and it's the rules that really annoy conservatives mostly.
That's my thing, is the rules, right?
Of course, and that's certainly understandable. And then you have impact aid, so it's the feds that have to pay for the Indian reservations to educate their kids, military bases, if you're abroad or your kid moves all over the place, they go to school there. So all of these things have to be paid for. And again, rural Mississippi doesn't have the money to pay for that. New York City maybe, and that's why such a small percentage of the money comes from the feds.
Yeah.
It's a lot, but when you think we have 1 million school kids, $2 billion is not a lot.
Right.
So the Department of Education is not just a bad thing. So I would say to people who say they want to cut it, again, thank God it's not your kid, but who do you want paying for these things that have to be paid for?
Sure.
Yeah,
I think that there's I'm not the extremist where I think everything needs to get cut and go back to anarchy and everybody just do what the hell they want. I'm not that way, obviously. But I do think there's quite a bit that can be cut from the federal government.
Of course.
When, you got Vivek and others who say, oh, we'll cut 75% of the government. And I'm like, that's a reasonable number to a certain degree, You don't want to cut certain things and you don't want to destroy certain things because you do need those for the actual proper functioning of what we consider to be society, right? Because the shift would be dramatic, and I think for most people, traumatic.
Yeah, but Mike, with the exception of entitlements, which are not going anywhere. I mean, conservatives have been talking about this since 1935.
What, welfare and all that? You mean?
No, I was really, when I say entitlements, I mean Medicare and Social Security.
Well, Social Security you're paying into, right? Yeah. Social Security, the fix for that would be just to have Congress stop borrowing from that fund, pay back what they took from it with interest, and then leave the damn fund alone and stop using it as a slush fund for anybody and everybody.
Well, by law, they're supposed to pay it back, but I guess they don't.
They don't. They never appropriate it in the budget to pay it back.
But other than those two things, the two biggest things we spend money on are military and debt service. The interest on our debt?
Our debt is extreme. And the military budget grows. But here's the thing about a military budget. The military budget is going to grow because if you're maintaining a military and you're being the world police, you're going to spend a ridiculous buttload of money, especially when you have this kind of, not really a full-on arms race like the nuclear war arms race we had, right? But you do have an arms race with China, with other countries, where you're trying to develop the next best technology, whether it's hypersonic missile technology, it's space-based, laser weaponry, or space-based, military satellites, or space-based military anything. That's a huge price tag.
Of course it is, yeah.
So I mean, you're going to spend. So
and there's a lot of waste and corruption there too.
To me, throughout the government is waste and corruption everywhere. You could easily trim a lot of fat from it.
And that to me is where they should start. Stop with this. Oh, let's get rid of this department or that department when you're not, because we all have our choices. If I had my choices to get rid of the Department of Homeland Security, what the fuck good do they do?
They're just another
spy on us and poke things up our ass.
Well, that's what it is. They came about because of the Patriot Act, right? I don't know if many people know that, but before the 9/11, DHS didn't exist.
It came afterwards.
After 9/11, you had the Patriot Act gets passed. The one that had all the FISA spying on Americans and all the other really bad bills in it that never should have gotten passed. But it got passed and it got repassed a bunch of times. But that's when that comes about. And what happens? That becomes its own entity, its own silo within government now. Because now you have all these disparate agencies that are under that heading that are supposed to kind of it's supposed to coalesce them, bring them all back together again, and have them share information so they can work towards a common goal of safety and security. Instead, what you get is them using the money to start, censorship NGOs, which they funded through DOD, right, to a tune of I think $1 billion or close to $1 billion. Then you've got all these other NGOs being funded by them. They help support in this migrant invasion we've had over the last few years under the Biden regime, and just a number of other really bad things. Any organization can be used for good or bad, right? It's like a gun. Right, exactly. Any gun can be used for good or bad. It depends on the intent of the person that's using it. So when you start swapping these agency heads out every time we have an election, you're getting one side or the other's version of whatever they think is best, and frankly, that's not good for the American people in either way. You need more stability in that realm.
And then everybody has their idea of what it is they want to cut. And listen, I'm against the blow to bureaucracy like any normal person should be. We're going to get into that when we talk in our next video about Project 2025 and the absolute misinformation that comes from there. But I'll tell you just a quick personal story of something, DC held good that does come from the Department of Education. So back when Bush passed No Child Left Behind.
Yeah, I remember that.
That focused almost entirely on math and reading. Good goals, math and reading are important, but to the detriment or to the denial of almost everything else.
Yeah.
Right? Especially history.
Yep.
So there was nothing in there, but everything was just about reading and math. So when they were debating it in the Senate, Bob Byrd from West Virginia, a Democrat, he would not give his vote to the I forget what the actual name of No Child Left Behind is, but I think it's the Elementary and Secondary School Act, whatever it is, unless there was a set aside for grants for teaching American history and teaching American civics. So he got that. And there was a program called Teaching American History. And this was just in the millions of dollars, not billions, right? This was just in the millions. It was about $150 million that different local schools, or school districts rather, would compete to try to get a grant in order to help teach American history. I'll tell you, one of my favorite historians is a guy named H.W. Brents. And when he starts his lectures, a couple of times he started with the same joke, where he'd say, almost nobody can remember their high school history teacher's last name, but they're pretty sure his first name was Coach. And what he was saying is that nobody ever cared about history teachers being experts, right? It was just, give Coach the textbook over the summer, let him memorize, and then teach the kids, the Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th. What's the big deal? It doesn't matter. But it does matter. And this particular grant that was given to the Department of Education to dole out teaching American history, I was a part of. And what it was where history teachers, again, this costs money, history teachers would be taken out of the classroom for a couple of days a year, maybe 4 or 5 days a year, and they would be partnered up with a professor or a famous historian. I've worked with a lot of historians. You may have even read their books. And the idea was to get secondary school history teachers, middle and high school teachers, to be more like history professors, be experts, be quote-unquote historians. Right? Yeah. And it costs money to do that. You have to pay these professors for their time. They travel from all over the country to work in these school districts, right? There's a lot of material that's given out. And it would be, combinations of lectures and then hands-on things and whatever. Most of the time, the training that teachers get is absolute garbage. Bullshit.
Yeah, it's like
this was fucking fantastic. This was fantastic. Changed my career. That made me 100% of a better teacher, night and day. Because it really got a deeper under. It was like going back to college in a sense, but working collaboratively with other teachers. Anyway, long story short, when the Tea Party came along, wants to cut everything, right? So when Obama was president, God forbid you do anything that agrees with Obama, and he wanted to continue these grants, and Duncan Hunter from California, one of the Tea Party darlings back then, decided that this was a waste of $150 or $130 million in a budget that has fucking trillions, Mike.
Yep.
All right, we're talking about $130, $140 million because without knowing, he decided that this is just liberal bullshit where they're indoctrinating teachers so they can indoctrinate kids. Mike, the professors I worked with, some were liberal, some were conservative, I couldn't even fucking tell you. That never came up.
Yeah, because they never came up. History, not their beliefs, but actual history.
Yes. So all the curriculum writing we did, everything, all the projects we came up with to bring back to schools, none of it had anything to do with liberal, conservative, whatever. But in the minds of these, these right-wingers, anything that has to do with college professors or history has got to be liberal, it's got to be indoctrinating. I can tell you, and I can tell our 43 viewers out there, first-hand information, was nothing fucking political at all. And the amount of materials that was given to local schools that a lot of them couldn't afford it on their own to enhance the teaching of American history, which I always thought was a conservative goal, right?
I agree.
Was cut. And it was cut down to something like $40 million, which is nothing. And then eventually it just disappeared. Yeah. And then local school districts that have money like New York City, they created their own. And that, of course, is going to be liberal bullshit.
Yeah.
Because it's created by the New York City Board of Education.
Yeah, and it's much more politically influenced.
So I'm kind of taken aback a little bit when we have somebody say nothing good comes of the Department of Education. No, this was good, And and by the way, 140, 150 million, whatever it was, not a lot of money. So they partnered up with nonprofits like the Gilded Lehman Institute and people like that. I got accepted into like 3 or 4 different fellowships from this. With those partnerships, we spent time at Dickinson University down by Gettysburg. Spent time at I can't remember now. St. Mary's down by Baltimore. The University of Virginia, the Miller Center for Presidential Studies.
Yeah.
I was there working with top fucking historians in the country, top presidential historians, and bring that back into the classroom, and then that gets to help kids understand America. What is wrong with that? I'd like to ask anybody out there, why and how is that a waste of money?
And see, that I don't disagree with. I think you're right. I think that's something that should stay. But this is why I say we can't have the echo chamber anymore, right? And that's why we're doing this. That's exactly why me and you are doing this, right? So we can stop that echo chamber. We can actually have a reasonable conversation with other Americans, regardless of what you consider yourself to be politically, so that we can actually move that ball forward in a way that makes sense and actually helps.
Right. Instead of a knee-jerk reaction where, professors are liberal, the professors are involved in this, let's cut it. Without even looking into it.
The echo chamber tells you either all or nothing. That's it. It's only two sides. Which, I don't know how anybody lives their lives out there, but if you're living your life to that extreme with all or nothing like that, you're going to have you might hit some high peaks, you might, but for the most part, you're going to hit some really low lows and keep going lower. Because it's just not a realistic way to live. And the government is the same way. It can't be managed that way. You can't manage the government like a business, because it's just not a business. It doesn't really operate in that direction. It doesn't operate that way.
No, that's a great point. You're right.
You can't. You just can't operate like a business. It doesn't work like that. But that's not saying you can't take some business principles and apply them to government.
Sure.
And I think that, we could definitely stand a much more reduced government. We could definitely withstand much less intrusion by the government. I think we need, if I'm being honest, I think we need guardrails, right? So we need policies in place and laws in place that are enforced that prohibit these, governments or these political groups of either side from influencing legislation for this money. So in other words, if this money's going to this school district, we can't tie some kind of, politicized agenda to that money for the school district. Like, okay, you can have this money, but only if you, hang flag, trans kids from flag poles.
And Mike, that's what's happening now. And that's why, and I get the animosity towards the Department of Education. Because when you get a president like Biden, if you look at their mission statements now online, it's got nothing to do with any of the stuff I was just talking about, but it's got everything to do with equity and transgender and this and that and the other thing, and making sure that
and critical race theory and all the nonsense that goes on with it.
So it saddens me because I fully get, because I am kind of conservative, I fully get why conservatives would have a knee-jerk reaction. Say, cut that. My answer is no, don't cut that. Cut Biden. Cut that bullshit. Because the Department of Education does do good things. And again, who's going to pay for those kids in wheelchairs, those kids with severe mental disabilities or learning disabilities or physical disabilities? Has to be paid for. There's just no way around it, Mike, and local school districts can't afford it.
And how many kids have IEPs of different, varying degrees? Of course. And there's tremendous amounts of those out there, and those kids need those extra resources, those extra helps. I'm not against any of that stuff. I'm not against helping kids. Obviously, kids to me are the best thing in the world. I think they're the greatest thing ever, and I think that, if you're out there and you're not having kids, you're probably a miserable person, right? Kids give your life meaning. They really do. They really do. There's only so many years you can be the party girl or guy. You got to have some kind of meaning in life, and kids really, truly bring that. But as far as education, you just get back to Western, classic Western education. Teach kids to be critical thinkers and problem solvers. Right now, we teach them to be virtue signalers and victims. That's the problem we have. And what are we seeing for that? We're seeing this explosion within our own society of this nihilistic, narcissistic person that just is miserable and just poisons everything around them, because that's what we taught them to be. In the 90s, right, they were medicating the crap out of kids to try and get them to calm down. Okay, kids are hyper. That's just the way they are. It's going to be that way. You don't have to medicate them. But everything became a disorder, and it was this disorder and that disorder, and we're just pushing all these meds down kids' throats. And then we wonder why we have an opioid generation problem. We wonder why we have children who have no self-identity or self-image or self-confidence, why everything is virtue signaling, and we did all this at the same time that social media was developing. It's a perfect storm of shit, and that's what it did.
It absolutely is.
So if we brought back those teachers and said, listen, we're going to get rid of all these administrators, okay? We are. We're going to reduce the administration down to actually what's needed to administer a school. Not all this extra seat spots, whatever, for DEI, for all the other bullshit they stuck in there. And actually put that money back in the hands of teachers, put the teachers back in the classroom, and put the curriculum back in the teachers' hands to be able to teach the way they should be able to teach.
Well, and that was the idea of the program that I was explaining before, right?
Yep.
Because your average math teacher, again, I'm talking about in secondary school, elementary teachers teach everything.
Yeah.
I'm not putting them down, but you can't be an expert on math, science, history, everything. Right?
No,
they teach everything.
You can't, no.
And they're teaching 9-year-olds, so obviously they don't have to
they're doing
a high level.
Kind of, yeah.
But when you talk about teaching AP history or something, that teacher should be just as qualified and just as knowledgeable in their subject as you would expect somebody who's teaching AP math, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was the idea of that program, to try to get, and obviously you can't get every teacher involved in a program that there's only $140 million in grants and so forth. But they could turnkey. They go back to their departments and they go over with their colleagues what they got.
So that knowledge spreads.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are not bad things. But what you did bring up before is a bad thing. And that's where I understand what people have, like our commenter, what they object to. Where there is federal money, there is federal rules. And now with all of these rules and nonsense, they don't want to teach. And again, I don't know who they are. Everybody always asks me that when I say these things.
It's just that massive...
Whoever they are.
Yeah.
They don't want to teach the classics anymore because the classics were written by white men. But there's a good history lesson in there alone. Right? I mean, that right there tells you the racism of the time. The fact that you didn't have classics written by minorities shows that they were shut out of the opportunity to even be a part of that, right? So it's not racist to teach it. It's actually a good place to teach what that racism was, but that doesn't mean that it's not a classic, right? Those books are classics rather for reasons. They get you to think, and anybody can relate to them. But just from watching on TV, and it is true, the type of books that now that they have children read is garbage. It's explicit.
It's wholly inappropriate.
And it doesn't serve a purpose. There is no thinking.
The purpose is, to indoctrinate them into some kind of amoral kind of nonsensical existence. It's Brave New World brought to life, right?
And Brave New World is a book that probably isn't taught very much in school anymore, ironically.
By Ford, it's not. No, they don't teach that, right? Because that would expose them for what they really are. Because they would see too many parallels in that book to what these psychopaths want to do right now.
Listen, you give a smart kid Brave New World or Animal Farm or 1984, and you get them questioning and thinking, they'll reach the same conclusion we're alluding to right now.
It's amazing, right? Karl Marx took all that time to write this great big, illustrious manifesto of how you make this perfect so-called, utopian society. And here comes George Orwell with a little book about farm animals and explains exactly why that is the worst possible idea you'd ever have.
And by the way, to be truly educated, you should read both.
You should read both.
You should read the Communist Manifesto.
I've read it.
Listen, I'm sure you can't anymore, but when we were growing up, Mike, you can go to the local library and get Mein Kampf.
Yeah, I read it.
And I read it too. We had to in college. We didn't read the whole thing, but we read parts of it. At least I don't remember reading the whole thing.
No,
but you have to. How do you understand one of the most evil people in the world without reading what he actually thought? He wasn't beating around the bush in Mein Kampf. I mean, he was saying exactly what he wanted to do.
No, anybody who was surprised by what the guy was planning on doing should have read his book, because he was
absolutely.
There was all kinds of spoilers in there. I was like, oh my god.
So you cannot possibly understand World War II and understand Nazism and understand Adolf Hitler without reading that. But no, I don't know this as a fact, but I would bet you can't go to the library and get that anymore because
I seriously doubt it.
Some group probably went apoplectic and said, get this out of here.
Because they don't want to reward. But here's the thing, if you stop teaching history, you're going to repeat that history, right, in some sense. So if you, say, read Mein Kampf in college, right, you're going to be that much more prepared for that kind of personality type when they do present themselves on a world stage somewhere, and you're going to recognize those signs and symbols of that person much more easily.
Mm-hmm.
So it's preparing yourself for what might be. It's preparing yourself for a world that can be very cruel at times.
Yes.
So I think that honest teaching is what needs to come back. And that's why I say that classic Western civilization kind of teaching.
Absolutely.
Liberal ideas, right? When we're talking about not liberal.
You're talking about small L liberal.
Yeah, not the progressive psycho right now. Okay, let's not go crazy. But that Western liberal civilization, education that used to be. So where kids really were learning Latin and they were reading works in Latin and they were understanding Shakespeare and they were reading all these different things and they were understanding it in a historical concept of the time where it was written.
And relating it to the time you live in, and that's what made those things so great, Mike.
That's just it. You could take the lessons from there and parallel to
100%. You could take Hamlet and you could relate it to politics
now.
Sure,
absolutely.
You could take
Othello and all that, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
And again, that's why those are classics, and the stuff that they're pushing on kids now are never going to be classics. They don't get you to think.
Well, they're hot
and
garbage.
Wonder. The whole idea of education, Mike, is not to sit and listen to somebody, go down the list of facts, right? The whole idea of education is wondering.
Yeah, it's critical thinking, it's curiosity, and
wanting to know right? That's the whole point.
And that's the
certain
best way to
books get you
teach.
that.
Yeah, and that's the best way to teach problem solving and critical thinking,
Right.
which is what we want. Right now, you have this indoctrination academy where we teach these kids that everybody's trans, everything's inside out, the world's whatever. How good are you doing, anybody? You're not. You're creating automatons to do exactly what you want them to do.
No, and they get nothing out of it. And most of what you learn, you're going to forget anyway. But you don't forget how to think. So if you're not teaching that, then you're not teaching anything. Most of 90. Listen, the only reason I know a lot about history is because I made that my career.
Yeah.
So I know I learned about the Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what the fuck that is now. I learned this. Right? You forget most of the things. Bullshit. Tell me.
Pythagoras.
I didn't ask you who wrote it. I said,
Triangles.
what's the theorem?
Angles of the triangles and stuff.
What's the theorem?
So, is it equilateral triangles, right? Two sides are always equal to whatever. I gotta look up the actual formula.
You remember.
I remember it more or less. I don't remember the formula off the top of my head because I'm not using it every day anymore.
But that's my point,
but
right?
If I was a mathematician or a physicist, I might need to know that more accurately.
That's exactly my point, Mike. So not everybody's going to remember all the facts they learned in American history because they're not going to use it all the time. But if you remember how to think, if you remember how to look things up, if you have that inquisitive nature, that's what you got to teach in school because that's what gets people smarter in any subject.
Of course, because you got to reward that curiosity and foster that environment of seeking those answers, and that's what school's supposed to be, right? You're supposed to learn how to find the answers you seek. That's what you're really learning. It's not about memorizing a set number of facts. It's not memorizing the capitals of every single state. It's learning to find that information on your own. It's learning to seek those things on your own.
And questioning, right? Socratic, right?
Absolutely. Question everything.
Thinking, going further.
Rationalize it, have a conversation about it, maybe figure out that you're not right, step back, pull back, go back a different direction.
I mean, imagine if our ancestors didn't look in the sky and wonder why the sun starts over there and then by the end of the day it's over there. You have to wonder.
We'd still be in caves.
Yeah, you have to wonder. You have to try to find things out. That's the idea of education. So again,
couldn't agree more.
Back to how we started this. I do understand the political objection that people have. I understand why people reflexively don't like the Department of Education.
Well, because
all I would ask
traditionally pushed leftist values onto schools. Yeah.
Well, now under this administration, yes, but I would
just past has done the same, but not quite to this degree. But yeah, it's done it.
I would just ask people to look, to see where that money really is going. What exactly is it you would want to cut? Where would you want that benefit to come from if it is cut and has to go somewhere else? Just think it through. And I always go back to Rick Perry and what bullshit it was when he claimed that he had 3 departments he wants to cut and couldn't remember the third one. So it's just...
We'll cut something.
Right. So it's just reflexive bullshit. We want to cut it because we're Republicans and we say we're supposed to cut it.
That's because that's a political talking point, right? That's a bullet point on some political cue card he has. It's not an actual thought process or a plan.
Right. So that's all I would ask. Anybody could have their own opinion. God knows I'm no expert.
No, we want to know opinions, right? That's what we're here for. We're here for your opinion. If you disagree, tell us why, please. We'd love to hear.
But I mean, in general, too. I mean, people want to cut the Department of Education, fine. But just all I would ask is think it through, look it up, see how much money is spent. And I'll go back to what I said before. I know it's really a bullshit kind of a thought because we're not sacrificing one for the other. But having no problems handing Volodymyr Zelensky $60 billion every time he fucking comes here, but you're so quick to say we're wasting $60 billion on the Department of Education. And again, I know one doesn't sacrifice the other. I get it. But just philosophically, if you're that worried about cutting money, you want to cut the money of servicing children, but you're okay with sending all this money to Israel and Ukraine and God knows where the fucking world.
Everybody talks about like cutting the money. And I know we're getting off education for just a moment, but just to kind of maybe give people a little education on that point. So we talk about education and like the big, like the draw on money, how much money the government spends, the deficit, all these things. Nobody looks at the State Department, right? Nobody ever does. Everybody's like, oh, the State Department. Nobody thinks about it, There was a reason that Hillary Clinton, when she had to step down and let Obama take the spot, took the State Department. There's a reason. It is an extremely powerful position.
Oh, very much so.
Extremely. Because all the money in the State Department that goes to these other nations is tied directly to whatever the State Department says it's tied to. It's LGBTQ mafia crap. Whatever it is, whatever policies that they're trying to push, just as much as they'll push that on our own school systems for the money, they will push that on other countries for their money as well. They will. They'll actually tie that money to whatever policy they want to see in that country. So they use it to kind of steer the narrative in a lot of other countries as well. If you really want to cut off the flow of money and really see money go to America first and actually restoring our nation's infrastructure, things like that, including our education system, then that's where I would honestly start. I would start with state.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the State Department, I think, is the most important department we have. I mean, what we call a State Department, what other countries call a foreign ministry. I mean, we do have to deal with the rest of the world.
Not talking about cutting it out completely. Don't get me wrong. I don't say I'm going to get rid of the State Department and operate blind and go back to isolationist policies at all, because that's insane.
Well, even when we were an isolationist country, we were still at a State Department. Thomas Jefferson was our first Secretary of State, right? I mean,
right.
You do have to
have
a
some
department
contact with
that
the
does that.
outside world.
That's why that was the first
But
department
you
created.
can look to the State Department. If you're looking for government fraud, waste, and abuse, you're going to find a very, very significant chunk of it is right there.
Well, and remember, all these departments, Mike, have all these subdivisions also.
And that's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Should go.
And there's so much of them hidden under state.
Yeah.
You know, Department of Education, I'm sure, has its own little subgroups that are kind of like
Yeah.
fat and lazy and not really doing much and just sucking up dollars. But if you compared like that to like the State Department or like say the Pentagon, Department of Defense, or even to like our intelligence community, forget it. You know, the comparison it'd blow your mind, because the vast majority of the money being wasted is being wasted in those other areas, in the military-industrial complex. So, in Department of Defense and intelligence community, in our State Department especially, because, you know, they're sending, you know, do you really think they're sending $2 billion to Pakistan for LGBTQ friggin' mafia training? No. That's not even remotely, you know, factually correct. Just not at all. So if you start there, that's where you'll find.
And that's where the political
real
arguments come in, right? Is what to not do or what to cut. But it's definitely a blow to bureaucracy. We're going to talk in our next video a little bit about Project 2025.
And then we'll get into that more. But
yeah, and that's really what that whole thing is about. And that's always been a conservative thing, because we do have an out-of-control bureaucracy. But to me, it comes back to two things, and I've said it before. One, Congress has to stop handing over lawmaking authority to federal agencies in the executive branch. It's their job to make laws. It's their job to make the rules. Number two, where they do send that money out and where there are executive offices and so forth, Congress has to do its job of oversight.
Audit those offices.
And I bring it up all the time, the Truman Committee during World War II, right? I've brought it up a million times already.
Yeah, we brought it up in
things
one of the last
like
videos.
that. So until Congress does its job, this is never going to be solved, because Congress should be overseeing all this money that they appropriate to these federal agencies.
I agree.
And they should also be the ones making the rules, or making sure at least that their intent is followed. And that's what the Chevron decision was about, I guess, right?
Yeah.
That's where the
Kind of
problems
trying
are.
to smack Congress a bit and put it back on them to regulate these things and put it back in there.
So when Congress appropriated a lousy $150 million or whatever it was for that Teaching American History grant, there's no reason to cut it. If you were worried that if people were worried that it was being spent unwisely, then let Congress do its job and look into it and find out, is it being doled out the way that they intended when they wrote it.
And to me, just me personally, as a parent, I like that idea of that program. I like programs like that. I want to see math teachers go, work with these mathematicians at MIT or wherever else, just so they can get that kind of higher level understanding of things, so they can bring that back to their schools, share it with the other educators, and especially with the students, with our children.
Sure.
Because that's how you truly get like that. That's inspiring for you. You're going to take the inspiration, you're going to take it and carry it back, and you're going to light the torches of inspiration for others. That's what happens, right? Courage is contagious. We say it all the time. Well, so is that inspiration. So is that kind of that inquisitiveness or that curiosity. So if Rick goes and he learns something about history that he didn't know before from this really esteemed historian, and now he comes back to the school and he's talking to other history professors, and he's like, "Look what I learned." Exactly. So now it spreads to them, and then they spread it to those children. That's an excellent way. That's an excellent way to move the ball forward and get people involved.
But things have changed quite a bit in the 15 years since that program came along, or 18 years, and things are different now, and I get the anger out there, and I share in it. And it's quite honestly one of the reasons why I left the system. I mean, it's just...
Well, look where I left my old job, right? Look where I left my career behind me.
I mean, at some point, it's just enough. I always won the fight. That's the beauty of tenure. Mm-hmm. As long as I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, you can't fire me, so I don't have to listen to that crap. And I ignored that crap most of the time, or fought back against it most of the time. But, dude, I'm almost 60 years old. I'm tired of fucking fighting.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. Listen, give education back to the educators. Should the parents have a say in education? Absolutely. Sure. They should, to a certain degree. But at the same time, we can't discount the voices of educators. Not administrators, but educators. So if you really want to cut the fat in that system, Well, then you'd stop the ridiculous contracts given to people who donate to political campaigns or are tied to political campaigns in some way. You would stop this constant, nepotistic need to add positions to schools that don't necessarily need to exist or don't belong.
Which they do quite a bit.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where the real fraud and waste comes from.
So DCL, I don't know, I just wanted to give you an example of something good that the Department of Education does do, and understanding, again, just put that $68 billion in perspective. Sounds like a freaking lot of money, but again, it's what the mayor of Munchkinland walks out of here every time he fucking comes,
It's a drop in the bucket, and a payment to Ukraine to keep all the corrupt happy.
Yep.
But
all right, Mikey.
I think we're agreed on that, right? Education should go back to the educators. Parents should obviously have a voice in that, and that should be the.
And again, the federal government should not. There should not always be strings attached to the money.
No strings attached to the money. Listen, if you're going to fund an underserved school district because they don't have that kind of money because the community is rural and poor or whatever the case, then that money should go to that school district to make sure those children are receiving the support they need.
Right.
Not based upon...
Because that's what the Title I money is supposed to be for, right? The Title I school gets that extra money from the federal government because they have either very low-income students or students with disabilities, a large amount of them, nowadays English language learners, so forth. That money has to come from somewhere, but again, I agree with you and probably the viewers out there who wrote about it. Once you start putting those strings attached to it, it becomes fucking annoying, and I understand why people object to it. I really do.
You know why this is an excellent subject, though? Especially for like us here, what we're trying to do? Because it's a very simple way to kind of show people, like, there's political talking points up here, like, cut all this. But this is the reality of it.
Right.
Here's the reality of it. Here's what we're really talking about. Here's why this doesn't necessarily match up to this, and why it's important to get out of that echo chamber and actually start having this conversation.
Right, because cuts affect people.
Yeah, because we need to educate ourselves as Americans and as parents, as everything, about what really matters, what really doesn't, how it really works, so that we can make the proper decisions going forward together as a people, not just constantly yelling at each other from our various echo chambers and thinking somehow we made a difference. It doesn't work like that.
All right, Mikey, tell them what they got to do. If they're still with us.
They're still with us. There's at least one with us, the person who edits this. She knows she's watching. So we have at least one view every time.
But the rest of you got to subscribe, comment down below. We're trying to expand our viewer base here. Tell your friends if they want to hear just a normal conversation. Two guys that sometimes do yell at each other. Most of the time don't, but it's always, at least I think, intelligent conversations. And neither one of us claims to be I'm an expert on fucking nothing. Nothing in this world. Don't pretend to be. Just have my own thoughts, that's all.
That's it. Listen, we just want to bring people back together again. Get the conversation started again and actually talking to each other again. Just like this, where we're breaking down these so-called political talking facts into concepts that actually make sense so we can find an actual real path forward together.
So comment about what you heard, and like we did with DCL, 414-1, whatever it was, we'll shout you out if you bring up something that makes us think and maybe lead to a different episode. We love it. Comment, subscribe. Mike, you know the routine is 40 minutes. My ass is killing me. Let's get out of here.
So we're going to take Hemorrhoid Man upstairs. Okay.
Have a good night.
Good night, guys. Thank you again for listening, watching, showing it, sharing it, liking it,
thanks for joining us on the dirt road.
All right. We appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Go Mets. Go Yankees.
That's it.